Today, I'm going to rank every Red Dead Redemption 2 death in a tier list, starting from the worst deaths and going all the way up to the best deaths. 99% of my viewers are unsubscribed, so if you'd like to see more content like this, subscribe as I'll be posting tier lists every single day. In last place, I have Alberto Fusar's death. Alberto Fusar's death is probably one of the worst in the entire game. You have this major antagonist, definitely the major antagonist of Chapter 5, and he dies in like the most boring way possible. You shoot him out of a tower, and there's no cutscene. I think the cutscene where you do have the Mexican standoff is kind of cool, but that's not his actual death. So I think this one is just really bad. You have a bad character having a bad death, or just a unemotional, there's just nothing going on with this death. So I think I'm going to have to put this one in F tier. In 16th place, I have Molly O'Shea's death. I think this one is also pretty unimportant, especially when you realize she's not actually the rat. But I think this one is a little bit better than at least Fusar's death. I think this is a character you don't really care about at all. She doesn't really do anything in the camp at all. But the fact that she does die here and you kind of think she's the rat here, I think it does put it a little bit above the Fusar's death. But I think just because Molly is such an unlikable character, you can't really like her as a character because she doesn't do anything at all. It has to go super low, so I'm going to put it in D tier. In 15th place, I have Leopold Strauss's death. This isn't really a real death. It's just kind of like in talking where it's like mentioned by Charles that he died in captivity. But I think this one is a super overrated death. Everyone's like, oh, Strauss didn't rat on everyone else. He's not the rat. He's a good person. He died in captivity. But it's like Strauss wasn't like, who is he gonna rat on? They all left at that point, and like I'm assuming he was picked up after the Vanderlyn gang had disbanded. So it was like, who is he gonna rat on? Even if he said anything, what are they gonna do to him? I don't know. It's a super overrated death in my opinion. I think this one's also gonna have to go in D tier because it's a character I don't really like and nothing really goes on. It's not like a cutscene or anything. It's just a mention in passing death. So I think I have to put this one in D tier as well. In 14th place, I have Colonel Favors' death. I think Colonel Favors is also a pretty boring character. He's not really a bad antagonist. Like, he's an antagonist, but you don't really care about him that much. He's just like a bad guy who's running an army. I think this one just has to be a little bit above the other ones because in payback for him killing eagle flies right in front of you, and you do get at least like a dead-eye death, so you actually get to take part in his death. So I think that's also pretty cool. But Colonel Favors is not a great character, and I feel like I didn't even realize this was Colonel Favors for a while. Like, I understood it is, but like you don't really care about him that much as an antagonist, so I don't think this death really matters. So this one's also going to have to go into D tier. In 13th place, I've got Kieran Duffy's death. I think this one is just such a bad way of doing it. You have Kieran's death and you just have him bringing in with his head cut off. I think it's just a little bit too much for me at this point. Like, Kieran is a character you don't really care about that much. I mean, some people do, but like on your first playthrough, you don't really care too much about Kieran, especially if you don't know when he's actually going to die. And when he does die, it's weird, but you're kind of just thrown into assault right after that, so you can't really process it when it's actually happening. So I think it takes away a little bit of the emotional weight of it, and especially when you see Kieran's head just chopped off, it kind of just desensitizes you to his actual death itself. So I don't really know. He's not really the biggest part of the gang, but I think I'm gonna have to put this one in C tier. There's just not that much emotional weight on this one. In 12th place, I got Miss Grimshaw's death. I think same thing with Kieran's. There's not that much an emotional weight here. You have her death, and then you have to get back into the action of like trying to stop Micah and trying to stop Agent Ross from actually killing you, and you have to save John. So it's like there's not that much emotional weight, but this one really caught me off guard as well. So it was just like you have Micah there, and then Miss Grimshaw just goes boop, and then she gets shot right there. So I don't know. It also just shows how little people were actually on Arthur's side. It's a death that has a little bit of emotional weight to it, but again, with Kieran's death, you just have to get into the action right away after that, so it cuts a lot of that same emotional impact as a lot of these other higher deaths have. So this one's also going to have to go into C tier. In 11th place, I got Leviticus Cornwall's death. I think this is a really solid, interesting moment of a death, but I think it's just one of those things where you hate that Dutch did this right here as the player. You just hated that this is the way he confronted Cornwall, and Cornwall is someone that I feel like you as the player also want to kill yourself, and I feel like just the way Dutch did it in this whole cutscene is just so annoying to you as the player. And again, you just have to get into the action right away after that because you have to kill everyone else. So again, that emotional impact of like actually killing Cornwall kind of wears off, and especially when there are a bunch of other antagonists where you finally have to kill after that, it kind of wears off a little bit. But I think this is still a solid death. I think Cornwall's a really good antagonist. I just think the way of killing him isn't that great, so this one's also going to have to go into C tier. In 10th place, I have Angelo Bronte's death. Again, same thing with Cornwall. Solid antagonist, but the way of his death is just a little annoying, like especially when you have him and you can ransom him off or do something else like that. There's so many other things you can do with Bronte to like actually use your power. You know, maybe they could get off of Tahiti with this, but instead they Dutch feeds him to the Gators, and it's just like, this is where you can see his morals have changed. He just wants revenge on this guy. And I don't know. I just think it's another death that, like, it is a cool death. It's a good way for Bronte to go. It's just like, as the player, you get so mad that this is the way that Dutch actually kills Bronte, and he just does it in such a revengeful way. So I don't know. I don't like this death that much, and the same thing with Cornwall's. There's not as much of an emotional impact, even though this one is at the end of the scene. It's just Dutch doing something really bad. So this one's also going to have to go into C tier. In 9th place, I've got Sean Maguire's death. This is like the first death that really shocks you. I think this is the first death on this entire list, and I think this is probably one of the more interesting ones. It doesn't really, again, have that same emotional impact because it is at the beginning of the scene. You don't really get to sit on it. You have to fight off all these other people, but it just shocks you when this happens because you don't really understand that all these people are going to die at this point. Like, after Sean's death, you realize, or like Sean and Kieran's death, you kind of realize that, oh yeah, maybe some of the gang members are going to die at this time, but Sean's death kind of really puts you into that, where it's like, okay, these Lemoyne rednecks are actually going to fight back against you guys, and this is really what sets it into play, and this is where you have to kill all these Lemoyne people. So I don't know. I love this death, but it can't really go any higher because the emotional impact isn't really there, even though Sean is a pretty cool character by himself. So this one's going to go into B tier. In 8th place, I've got Catherine Braithwaite's death. I think this one is a lot better just because I love the raid on Braithwaite Mansion, and you want to kill this old hag of a woman, but I think her death isn't really that impactful because I feel like she's not as good of an antagonist as like Bronte or Cornwall or a lot of these other people are, and I feel like her death is just really some revenge for kidnapping Jack. And I mean, when she sold Jack off to Bronte, it doesn't really finish her plot line that well, but I think just the way she died is really cool. She goes back into the fire, or like Dutch kills her herself. So I don't know. I love the way she died, and I love the fact that she did die because it's a character I really loved killing, and especially because there is a little bit of emotional impact, but I think because she's a less used antagonist, it's not the same as some of these other ones. So this one's also going to have to go into B tier. In 7th place, I've got Hosea Matthews' death. I think this is really one that shocked me when it happened. I mean, I wasn't really expecting Hosea to die this early into the game, but it can't be any higher to me just because I understood Hosea was going to die eventually. He's this old guy who was also sick. I just didn't think this was the way. And I think the emotional impact of like Hosea dying himself really gets lessened by the fact that you have to go into an assault right after, and then Lenny also dies in that same mission. So you get a 2-for-1 in this mission. So I think there is a little bit less of an emotional impact, especially because Hosea is a really old guy, but this have clearly affected a lot of other people in the game a lot because Hosea is like this really friendly guy, and I mean, clearly affected Dutch. So I think it is a really important death, but I don't think it's as important as some of these other ones, and I think it's going to have to go into B tier because it doesn't have that same emotional weight as some of these other ones do. In 6th place, I've got Agent Milton's death. I think everyone wanted to kill this man after all the things he put the Vanderlane gang throughout the entire game, but I don't really think this one is as high as some of these other ones because you're not killing him yourself. It's actually Abigail killing him. If you had Arthur like taking the gun from Milton and then shooting him in the head or something, I feel like it'd be a lot cooler or like a lot more interesting of a death. But I still think the fact that Abigail does get to kill him is a little bit poetic, and it's like strong woman or whatever. I don't know. I think this death is really solid though. It's a character you want to kill the entire game, and you finally do get to kill them, and then it's like, oh, the game's about to end. Like, you understand the game's about to end when Milton actually dies because he's like the main antagonist of the entire game, maybe with Cornwall and Colm as well. But I don't know. I definitely like the culmination of this death, but I don't think it's anything too special, especially when Abigail kills him, where it can't go any higher. But I still think it's an A tier death. It's a very, very solid death. In fifth place, I got Eagle Fly's death. I think this one has to hit so much harder because you always want to stop Eagle Flies from what he's doing. He kind of realizes that everything's going a little bit too far, and having a good connection with Rainfalls, and like Eagle Flies being the son of Rainfalls, and you get to see Rainfalls' actually reaction to Eagle Flies dying. It's just such a powerful moment. And also when Eagle Flies saves Arthur's life when Dutch kind of backs out on him, it's just such a sad moment to see. And I just think overall this has to be one of the most impactful deaths of the entire time, because Eagle Flies was so young, he was doing all these things, he was getting manipulated by Dutch, and he finally realized like what he was doing was wrong at his actual deathbed. And just the connection with all the characters who had a good connection to Eagle Flies, it's just such a hard-hitting death. And like, while you kind of understand it would happen because he was such an explosive character, and like this was eventually going to catch up to him, all the things he was doing was eventually going to catch up to him, it's just not the way you want it to happen, especially when he just saved Arthur's life a second beforehand at that point. So I don't know, this is a really great death, and I think this one's also going to have to go into A tier. In fourth place, I got Colm O'Driscoll's death. I think this one is just one of my favorite ones to do. Of course, you want to kill Colm O'Driscoll, but the fact that this guy was so confident, he was talking all this stuff right before his death, and then he looks up at the sniper and he sees Arthur's there. I just love that moment in the whole game, and it's just like this guy actually starts fearing death on his like hanging when he's about to get hanged. So I don't know, I love this whole mission. I think it's one of my favorites, even though I don't think Colm is as good of a character as some of these other people. I think his death definitely trumps those, and I think it's probably my favorite antagonist death of like just the way it goes. Like, of course, I think there is one antagonist that I'd rather see die, and I feel like that's what puts it higher, but I think this is the most interesting death in the entire game. But just because it's Colm, it kind of lowers it down a little bit for me. It's just one of the most interesting ways because you get to see Colm hang yourself, and he just starts getting super fearful because he sees that the Vanderlyn gang has stopped him from getting saved this time. So I don't know. I just love this death, and I think this one also has to go into A tier. In third place, I got Lenny Summers' death. This death just shocked me to the core. I just wasn't expecting another person in the gang right here to die right now. So this one just really shocked me. And the fact that it was just like right after Hosea's death, it was just like a 1-2 punch. And Lenny is a guy who's like 18 years old. Hosea kind of talked about how he wished Lenny would get out of the gang and do something else. It just is such a crazy death to me. And, you know, I wish it never happened. And when you have all these other people who are like, oh, Lenny, I can't believe Lenny died, and they just run by him, like Bill and Micah just run by Lenny right when he died in front of you. It just kind of sucks. And I don't know, this is such an impactful death to me, and I think just because of how young Lenny was and just how this death happened, where it's like Arthur kind of could have prevented it if he shot the people beforehand, it just has to go into the highest tier possible. And I think it's an S tier death just because of how it affected me. In second place, there can only be one death, and it's Micah Bell's death, because the whole game I would always want to kill Micah Bell. Micah Bell needs to die. Micah Bell needs to die. And especially when he became the Rat, I just wanted to kill him so badly. The first time I played through Red Dead Redemption 2, I went back for the money because I thought I could kill Micah there. I didn't realize exactly what would happen. And, you know, it was a much worse cutscene than if I went to help John's family. But I just wanted to kill this guy so badly. And eventually getting the chance to has to put it in S tier. I mean, you don't really get to kill Micah. I think Dutch does with that first shot, but you do get to put a bunch of shots into Micah. And I think that's just my favorite part of the entire game, eventually being able to kill this guy that you want to kill the entire game. So I don't know. I just love this death, and it's just like, it's the perfect like ending to Red Dead Redemption 2, because the player gets to do the thing they've wanted to do all game, and then you get to go into Red Dead Redemption 1 and see some more dynamics between all these people. So I don't know, I love this death, and it's a perfect way to end the game because it just gives the player exactly what they want. In first place, I've got Arthur Morgan's death. I feel like everyone has to have Arthur as the number one death, especially if you do get the good ending, as in high honor, and you go back to help save John and his family. So I think that is really like the best death in all of Red Dead Redemption 2. Some of the other ones are definitely like not great ways to like finish out your story as Arthur, but I think this one has to be the number one death. It's just the most emotional. You get to see Arthur, you know, succeed on, you know, dying right where the sun comes up, and you know, just it's an amazing, beautiful scene, and I feel like it has to be my favorite death in all of Red Dead Redemption 2. Even though you really don't want to lose your character, you kind of know it's eventually going to happen, especially with Arthur, where he has tuberculosis. And I mean, while you don't really want Micah or Dutch killing him, it has to go down that way. So I think this is my favorite death in all the game. It's just a great way to end it off. And I just love the way, you know, you have these beautiful sun coming up and you have Arthur's death and you kind of have his sun. Could have been his sun setting, but I think the sun coming up saying rise and rebirth of like John's family, I think it's just a great way to end the game. And this has to be the best death in all of Red Dead Redemption 2. That wraps up my entire Red Dead Redemption 2 deaths tier list. Let me know what you guys would change in the comments, and I'll argue with you guys or debate with you and tell you why I thought exactly what I thought. If you guys do want more content like this, please like and subscribe, as I'll be posting tier lists every single day.